This episode of Fuel the Fire TV podcast is brought to you in part by Kickaboo Meat Seasoning. Go to kickabooshops.com and enter the promo code FTFTV for 10% off all products and seasonings. All right, well, we're here with a good friend of mine, Alan Corbiere. Now, Alan Corbiere is from Chiging on Manitoulin Island, and Alan and I grew up together. We've been chums for a long time, and I'm very glad you're able to join us on today's podcast because you were definitely one of our key guests that when we started talking about Fuel the Fire podcast, and we were doing our list of guests, your name came to the very top of the list, and for a number of reasons, for a number of good reasons actually. One, we've got a good friendship. We've been friends for a long time, since we were little kids, and also you're an influential person on not only in Chiging and on Manitoulin Island, but all over the world actually, right?
Well, not the world.
Well, I don't know. I'd argue that, and we're going to get into why I think that a little bit. But first of all, Alan is doing his PhD, and you're doing that at York
University. Yeah.
York University. So, what's going on in the world of your PhD, and how's that coming along?
It was really interesting to pursue it. The first thing was I had to do Canadian history and Indigenous history, so you have to pick two fields and a third field, environmental history. Anyway, the Canadian history one I picked it was because I actually people look at me as a historian already, but my undergraduate degree is in environmental science, and then my master's is in environmental studies, and I've never actually had any formal history training. And the last history course I took would have been actually, I believe, high school.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and maybe I did take a history course in my undergrad, but I don't remember it.
Right.
So
anthropology or some type of history that way.
There was Native studies was just kind of really starting. It was really only at Trent and Laurentian that Native studies were around. And when I went to University of Toronto, there actually was a program starting up. So that really helped me out there, that particular program. It was called the Office of Aboriginal Student Services and Programs. But they brought in elders to the university, and they had different programming, and which was good. But what's interesting now to compare now and then, we got a lot more support for students, and there's actual spaces there for students now. Like an office of Aboriginal Student Services at York University in York Lanes, and then they also have a place they call Skenagoa Gamik, and it's a merging of two words. Skenagoa is a Mohawk word meaning "how are you," but literally, apparently, I've been told it means "are you walking with the Great Peace?" That's their big law, great law. And then Gamik just is a Anishinaabe word meaning structure.
Right.
So we say Jonya Gamik for the bank and Joshwade Gamik for the arena and stuff, so on. Anyway, when I got there, it was kind of the same, but this time I was better outfitted for not having culture shock. The freaky thing was there's actually Alex Gainfort from Chiging.
Yeah, I saw Alex at Foodland the other day.
He goes to school there.
Yeah.
And what blew me away is the place is there's so many students there and so big. I only bumped into him literally twice through the year. Yeah. And then I never actually bumped into Faith Bowden.
Right.
I was in this place called Very Hall, and I was on like the third floor, and I saw her and her Lakota go by, and I was like, oh, but there's no way I could get their attention to yell and stuff. So the place is just massive, so you really couldn't get lost in there, and you got to find your peers, but at the same time, I didn't really find it too necessary yet to actually find a Anishinaabe peer group there.
Yeah.
And there are apparently now the students there, but they're not really taking history. there's still a lot, still seem to be a lot doing like social work.
Yeah, nursing.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So with the history group, there's this 8 of us in this group right now, cohort. So it's a really focused program. And what was interesting is at first, I was supposed to read a book a day. I couldn't keep up with the pace, but you're supposed to speed read too. You read the intro, the conclusion, and then you go through as much as you can.
Right.
But the way I'm wired, I'm too old school. Like I was actually the oldest guy in the class. So, and then there's another guy who's younger than me, like 8 years younger. Then the rest are 26, 27, 28.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're like almost a father figure in that class.
Well, the other guy, I was like, he's a real animal, eh? So I was like, you call him Uncle Dave. But anyway, I thought it was going to be a more leisurely pace.
Right.
Like
kind of like an undergrad or maybe.
Yeah. And so when I signed up, actually my supervisor is named Carolyn Podruchny, and so I was always sitting on the fence whether to actually go into the program. And then one day she actually came up to a conference I organized in Sudbury called Ojibway. And she said, "Here, do you want to come?" She kept asking me if I wanted to go to the university. And I said, "Yeah, well, maybe." So she came to that conference and she said, "Here, you got a minute? Read this." And she put her laptop out, and it was my application form. And she had filled it out.
Really?
As much as she could.
So she's recruiting. Yeah. She's recruiting big time. She wants you part of the program.
So then she printed this. She said I could print this off and then finish the rest and sign it. So I did that. And then so I was still sitting on the fence because I was working at Lakeview with you there at the Anishinaabe Revival Program. So I felt like I hadn't gotten quite where I wanted it to go, and whether or not to actually the funding wasn't in place either. So funding fell in place, and then I still had my reservations. As I was packing up, I had the course syllabus.
Yeah.
So I was looking through the book list, and then I was going through my own library, and I was like picking off the books, and then I had 2-3 crates of books, and then I was like, I bought all these books and I never read them. Of the books that were laying there, maybe I read like 3, and I said I always wanted to read these books. I never had the time.
Yeah, or never made the time.
Yeah, and then I was like, and here the other thing was, I was thinking to myself, am I making the right decision? And then I looked at all those books, and I was like, I've been buying all these books all this time that I want to read these, and I want to actually think about them and consider them and think about them, and then have them try and inform my practice too. So it's like, I saw those there, and I was like, yeah, I'm making the right decision now, that I get to actually read these books, think about them, and learn new things.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's what I liked about the program is we think of, I think we think of a lot of things. We're going through a cultural revitalization here on the island. Well, not just the island, all of Turtle Island really. But I think we're still, some people really want to reject anything that's by the Jaganash. Mm-hmm. Even if it's a sound methodology, they'll like, that's Jaganash, don't use that.
Yeah.
There's this kind of
a little bit of a bias.
Yeah. But we want to discover our own, but at the same time our own methodology. But at the same time, I think sometimes we want to throw out the bathwater and the baby as well. So I think the books I've read in Canadian history, I found them to be really a lot of them. I was like, I could use this to help in a chapter writing the history of Chiging. So, for instance, one of them was just about the census, and this guy is looking at the census and how it was structured and made, and then just problematizing it the whole way through. Then I was like, we have a census here from like the earliest one I got is that I did find was 1847, but they're more or less pay lists, treaty pay lists.
Right.
Yeah, but they do say, and it was just heads of family.
Yeah.
And then it'll say women, children, and but it didn't say anything about the occupation. But we did participate in 1861, 1871, 1881, 1891. So all these census information are actually, we have these here. The other interesting thing that another book I read was a woman did one about working families. And it was about the economy that actually isn't major economy, basically a sub-economy. So she looked at how women and children actually contributed to the household economy, and that's what the book was basically. It's called Working Families,
right?
But it was about the household economy, and she was able to document these when the children were going off to work and how they would contribute, because there's this whole breadwinner mythology that a man brings home the bread, the money, the dough, and then the whole family, he's supporting the whole family. But basically, you look at the history of it, no man back then would ever been able to provide for his whole family on that wage. The wages were so poor that everyone had to work and stuff. So I was like, well, we haven't really done this for Anishinaabe. Like we're in the same situation in the sense that what did we actually make a living off here in 1861, 1871, 1881? And we know that they tried to make cut wood and sell wood, but they were prohibited by the Indian agent, by the Indian Act. And
same thing with fish.
Fishing and
yeah.
So all these, but they still survived. But it's like, well, okay, what was their economy here? So that's one thing that actually could be done. It sounds kind of simple enough in the sense that, well, we just fished and hunted, but it's like, well, if you actually want to look a bit more at it, and then when you mentioned this Robinson Huron Treaty case earlier, then it's actually would tie into that as well. Like, well, if we actually had kept numbers of all this, what our economy was, then we would see how this would have, what we lost, and by not being able to sell that, by being able to hunt and fish over the whole territory and sell whatever.
And the data that's held within would go to support whatever we're trying to prove there. Now, as far as books are concerned, I listened to the top 10 books on Canada Reads, and one of the things that I know up here on the island, it's not as easy to get access to the arts. You really have to try and get out there to see what's going on. There isn't always something going on. And one of the things in the Canada Reads top 10 books was Tanya and the Seven Fallen Feathers. Tanya Talaga. Right now, the Massey Hall lectures. Did you get a chance to go to any of those? Or
I went to the final one in Toronto at Corner Hall. Okay. Yeah.
And who was that?
That's her.
That was. You did go to that one?
Yeah.
And how was that?
It was good. Just to back up a bit, she called me up.
Tanya did.
Yeah, right. And she asked me to read over three of her chapters. Really? So I read them, and I kind of made suggestions, and then she ended up getting in touch. I gave her a document that Jim Dumont had written. Okay. And so she really liked that, and she used that as well, and then she ended up getting in touch. She was trying to get in touch with Jim Dumont to go over some of the ideas about it. Basically, she was asking more about what happens with suicide, eh? Yeah. And then so I was telling her what I'd heard, and then I said, well, here's a document, an article you can read that Jim Dumont did while he was at the University of Sudbury. She couldn't get in touch with him, but they put her in touch with Senator Murray Sinclair. Mm-hmm. And so he was able to help her out as well. And so that's why I had free tickets to go to this Massey lecture. Yeah. And but one of the things that I noticed there, this ain't really a criticism of her. I don't want to sound like I'm bashing her, but she in her lecture, and if you read her book, you'll see that she really relies a lot on like Martin Luther King and other black activists
for the racism piece.
Yeah. And then of course they're really insightful and inspiring quotes. But I was like, to me, that again just pointed to our lack of knowledge of what our own chiefs have said. Right. And then if she had read more of what our chiefs had said and stuff, maybe those quotes would have been included in that book.
And that's an interesting point, because access to that type of information is not widely known. We're not taught that in school. We don't use. We try to, and trying more and more to use First Nation voice and First Nation authors and base it on either local history or national First Nation history, but we just don't. There's not enough of it available, and so a lot of times I think what people do is they end up going to something that's more readily available that still gets the gist of it across. So that's interesting, and maybe that's something that it is something that I know we're trying to work on from the educational component, is to try and make sure that people know that our learners and kids know that this is what was said back in the day. Now, as far as city life, as far as I know, back we went to school in university in the 90s. You went to U of T and I was going to McMaster. So we would spend a lot of time, a lot of weekends researching, I guess it was, city life. Yeah. And you have an affinity for that city life. You like the city life as far as the urban indigenous scene. Yeah. What's different between now and then, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I can't really answer that per se, because the kind of indigenous scene we were into back then was different than now, eh? So back then I was partying, and I wasn't part of the art scene. Like there it looks like there was a vibrant art scene back then, and it was like they had Native Earth Performing Arts, and you had like Thompson Highway down there, and all these other people writing and doing great work now. But that's actually still going on. But what I see actually is it's better funded so far. But now, of course, we have Doug Ford just cut one of these. Yeah. So, but the other thing is that there is more people are diversifying in their artistic practice, and so you can go to different art galleries and see different art, different media. Yeah. So now, like I saw in the expositor that Shirley Chichu just has been awarded to the Order of Canada. Yeah. And but she's a playwright, a painter, and a filmmaker. Right. But there's a film festival there every year.
Right. Imaginative.
I forget how many years that is.
Yeah. So I think it's 10 years. I think.
So it's predated. When we were there, it wasn't there. But now it's there. Yeah. Right. So you have a lot of different things going on in the city with urban natives. The one thing that's now you got your own school. They got their own school as well. Mm-hmm. But when we left, they actually did have First Nation school, elementary school. Right. So anybody that had Native kids. But the problem there is you don't have like Chinatown, Little Italy, Little Portugal, but you don't really have a concentration per se of
an urban reserve type of thing.
Yeah, where everyone lives, because all the Nishnawik are scattered all over. Out. Yeah. So it's a real challenge to bring everybody to that school. Right. And then when they are, then you got Cree, you got Mohawk kids, or Cayuga kids, and Anishinaabe kids. So it's
huge language diversity and all of that.
So they try to teach Ojibway, and now it looks like Cayuga or Mohawk, and I'm not too sure. Sometimes they'll throw in Cree. Right. Yeah. So you actually could. When I was down there in Toronto in the 90s, I met so many different speakers there. A lot from the island, that I thought there's actually no reason why somebody couldn't become fluent here, that you could actually build a Anishinaabe speaking community in the city at that time. Right. And then I think back to my dad's generation, the people that moved down there, they actually did have that. Yeah. Like they all spoke Ojibwe, but that's the thing, is they went down already speaking. Right. Whereas what the challenge now is, people coming in, they don't speak. But some that are older people that still live in the city do speak. The thing is, as a problem of transmission. Right. Yeah. They
don't have anyone to speak it to, type of thing.
And then the actual language instruction methods, or the time dedicated to it once a week on Wednesday night for an hour, isn't going to cut it. Right. So you really have to bolster that, and then it comes back again to resources, like what you said about the just the history stuff, but also the language stuff. Mm-hmm. That a lot of people aren't. There's not a real diversification of and scaffolded material out there per se.
Right.
It's usually real beginner or real advanced, and there's nothing to get you from point A to point B. So
now that actually gets me thinking about what brought you back to Chiging when you were down there, and that was your work as a curator or the I don't know what your title was at the Ojibway Cultural Foundation, but you were the director there, and you've always had a passion for the language. You've always had an affinity for the historical side of things. And talk a little bit about what your work at the OCF was like and what you did there.
Actually, that's kind of, in a sense, it's a bit misinformation there. I never, like growing up, I never was into history. And in fact, my buddy, he's a prof at University of Saskatchewan. We both were at U of T at the same time. And he always rubs my face in this, because when we were, he got there, and then he was a year behind me. And then, so after he did his first year, then he come up to me, he's real excited. He says, "Oh, I picked my major." And I says, "Oh, well, what'd you pick?" "Oh, history." And I said, "What the hell are you going to do with a history degree?" So now he always says that to me.
And you're doing your PhD.
Now who's that? So I wasn't really into it. And then oral language per se, and until actually my daughter was born. And then my eldest daughter, Benes, when she was born, when she was conceived, actually, that's when I was like, well, to me, I usually say that I realized then that language stops with me, that my parents spoke and my grandparents spoke and all the way back, all the generations back, but it stops with me. But I can be one to try and pass on what I learn as much as I can and pass it on to my children and grandchildren, so that it isn't me that it stops at. But or I could just sit here and blame them or blame society, and then I just decided, no, I'm going to try and do this. Anyway, I see a lot of good things happening now. I've met some people that are called the Shkinishnabemajik, and it's Jessica Benson or Jessica Shonyas. She got married, as well as Mesquanquet Menominee from Perry Island, and Monty Magaki from Chippewa to Thames. They're young adults, and they've actually, I think Jessica's better speaker than me for sure. I'm not too sure about the other two guys, but they're really coming along. But the thing that ended up straightening me out was family life there, and then that's when I got into this. And it was actually like when I left the reserve here, people were all like, "You're smart. You should become the first doctor here. You go and become a doctor or something." Anyway, so I went and did my undergrad my first year. I blew it, and so I wasn't going to get into
med school.
Yeah, I blew that.
Blows your average.
Yeah, so I was, and then I was like, well, what the hell am I going to do? So I thought, well, maybe dentistry. And the same thing, I was like, do I really want to be a dentist? And so I was like, no. Then I was thinking, well, how can I help? If I can't help the people through health-wise, through physical health, maybe it's through the environment. So that sounds kind of cheesy, but that was my decision process. And so that's why I ended up getting into environment and looking at land and contaminants and stuff like that. And then that's when I got into, after my daughter, and that I started looking at these stories and the language. And then one of the posters at the Ojibway Culture Foundation was the voice of the land is in our language. That was there, yeah. So then I was like, I actually believed that. So and I was like, I felt like I was trying to find that. How does that manifest?
Right.
So that's how I ended up getting into this. And then when I moved back here, I actually was working with the Assembly of First Nations, and we moved back. Basically, it was we didn't want to raise our kids in the city, so Tam and I. We decided that we're going to move our family back here, raise them, and then the other idea at that time was I was supposed to become fluent, but I never did. I didn't become fluent just because of my jobs and stuff and that. Anyway, that was the idea, and so we even eliminated TV. Like when our kids were young, we didn't allow TV in the house.
Right.
And the idea was that they'll become readers, and then we'll pass on as much language as we could. But turned out it's a bit more challenging and difficult than that, eh?
But now, was your work at the OCF, was that language based, or what happened there? What was the bulk of your work? Did that kind of contribute to it, or?
Well, the first thing was I actually, when I moved back, I ended up working at with AFN still out of my house. Right. And then that job ended, and then I ended up getting a curator job at and it was for residential school at OCF, but it was just a summer contract. Yeah. And that's when I got introduced to archival research. I never did any archival research before. And this was when I met my friend Darlene Johnson from Cape Croker. And so she told me a bit about doing archival research. And so then I had no job. And the OCF gig canceled out. And then we started a group here. We call it Kinamadok. They're teaching each other. And it was Brian Bisson, Dan Simon, Louis DeBosque, Sam DeBosque, myself, and Adam DeBosque. And Brian Bisson and I were talking one day, and he had done one of his research papers for school. And I said, well, you know what, we all go to school now, but we actually don't come back and say what we found out about our community, like when we do research of our community. Right. This is what we should do. We should have a monthly forum, and each of us take a day, and we share what our work was up at the whatever school we went to, and whatever research paper we wrote about our community, and then people would just come out and listen. That was the idea. Anyway, then out of that, actually, and then I says we could put out a newsletter, and so we just started putting out this newsletter and stuff, and then I had done my master's by then, and when I had done my master's, I made Anishinaabe narrative part of my studies. Mm-hmm. And so I recorded elders from Chiging. So then when I came back and we had this Kinamadok group, I put some of the excerpts of elder interviews in those newsletters, and then people liked them. Right. So
there was a video component to that as well.
Yeah. So we worked with Sam. Yeah, when channel TV22 was around. Right. So but that was before we got the money. So this is how we just started like this little group. Yeah. And Susan Hare had it right when she kind of teased us, saying, "That's just an old boys club."
A young old boys club.
Young. Back then. Yeah. So we had our smoking jackets out, and but it was so we just wanted to. We were just all kind of history buffs. Eh? Yeah. None of us
a sharing form.
Yeah. No one had training or nothing. And then I recorded Johnny DeBosque and then a couple of others as well.
Telling stories.
Louis telling stories, and my dad and my Aunt Annie and others. And then I transcribed those stories with the assistance of my dad and then translated as well. So then I was like, okay, this was in my master's already. I'll just parse it down into more bite-sized articles that people can actually read and check out. Yeah. So we ended up asking the band for money to run it. And then the band funded this Kinamadok historical research program. Right. And so then we started producing these newsletters. And Terry DeBosque did I mention that Terry was part of it? He was an integral part of it, that's right. Anyway, so me and him were the main ones writing stuff. And then had to laugh because I gave him some, and I said, put these down at the band office and the post office and wherever else. So he did, and then he come back the next day. He goes, holy, all those are gone. Those newsletters are all gone. We got to print some more. I said, that was just Trizan and Angie. Picked them all. Our mothers picked them all up to make us feel good. So we ended up getting that, and then I what ended up happening was Terry actually was working at the UCCM sometimes too, and then he knew that they had archives for that Operation Rainbow court case. So I never knew that, and so we went down there, and then I just started reading the archival documents, and they have them put in these big, massive. They're more or less dude tanks. Yeah, and they're all printouts, and I saw in there, I saw a letter written in Ojibway. And I was like, oh, holy shit, they wrote in Ojibway. And so I just kind of, after that, I found other ones, and then I just got crazed for finding written Ojibway in the 1860s.
Now, who was that? Was that the Indian agents that were writing in that language, or was it transcribed?
It was it wasn't the Indian agents. It was actually the chiefs and the priests. So this was a protest movement against treaties that time.
Okay.
Yeah. So they wrote in Ojibway, and that was one of the big things. And back then I used to get scolded sometimes by different people. And they would tell me, you can't write that. You shouldn't write our language. Our language was never written. And I don't know how many times I was told that. You don't write our language. We never used to write it. Then when I found those letters written in Ojibway and signed by all these chiefs, and then other documents written by chiefs, I was like, sure, we used to write.
Yeah.
Yeah, it died out just like a lot of different other things, but we actually embraced that and we used it. So
right.
Then the other thing that I found there were different petitions, and they had clans, dodems on them. And then that's when I got fixated on, okay, I'm going to find my dodem.
Mm-hmm.
And I never actually found a Corbiere document signed with their dodem, but I found like Devaske and Watan, the Sans, which are now called Armstrongs, and Bem Guneshkungs, which are now called Bem Mosh. And so
no, dodem is basically means clan, right?
Yeah. So then I started compiling all this and putting it, and then I would, whenever I'd find a little tidbit, then I would put it into that newsletter, and then just try to share it.
Now, where would those documents be? Like you said, they were 100 years old. Like where? So they were obviously copies, but where did they come from?
So yeah, that's from the Library and Archives Canada. The majority of those came from Library and Archives Canada. So once I got through what the UCCM had done, then I knew the Jesuits had the other stuff. So I went to Montreal to the Jesuit archives as well, and then I went to Ontario archives because there's others that would go to Ontario after, and then I even went to Detroit Public Library, and they have it's called Burton Historical Collection, and this guy was just I don't know what you would call him, just a bibliophile, and he went around buying anybody's old papers that he knew that had anything to do with the history of Detroit. So Anishinaabe that were from Larber-Croche, Upper State Michigan, would come down, and then there were different deeds, and they would have the clan on there. So that was when I went down there. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get these.
Oh,
clan,
and you started to compile like
clans.
a database of all those different clans.
Yeah.
Now, you said something that about treaties, and you know, if you look up and search Alan Corbiere on Google, you're going to see wampum, and you're going to see treaties, and you're going to see a lot of documentation and videos about you talking about treaties and the wampum belt. Talk a little bit about that. Was that what led into, you know, the stuff about clans and your archival research? Did that just kind of open the door to treaty, you know, research, or how did that come about? Because you've been all over doing that.
Yeah, exactly. It was it really, all I started out to do was to learn Ojibway. That's what I tell people. And then I just got tired of saying Nalgans for a cup and dope wind for a table and pub wind for a chair. Yeah. And I said I want to learn our story. The reason I'm doing this is I want to learn our story from our perspective and in our language. In a world, to create that world view. Right? Yeah, to transmit that. Yeah. And so actually, when I worked at Chiefs of Ontario in around 96, Louis DeBosque actually came in to the office, and he would just sit there and visit me. And then I was telling him I'm learning Ojibway, and then so when he started talking to me in Ojibway, and then he mentioned a name that I recognized. He mentioned Nibakum, and this Nibakum actually was the first DeBosque's father. Anyway, I says, "Oh, Nibakum." I says, "I got a story here, and it was told in Wikido, and this story was I had photocopied it out of a book called the second report of the Odawa language project that was written in 1974. So these linguists had come up to the island and went to Wikwamkong, and they actually recorded different elders telling stories, and then they analyzed that. So they wrote it in a different obsolete orthography that linguists use, and then somebody came along and actually put it in the way we double vowel orthography we write now. So I was reading that story and I liked that story. So when Luigi mentioned Nibakum, then I said, oh, here, this is I found this in the library and just looking up different things. So then I said, well, let me record you. So I went to record him talking about, and then he mentioned Oga. And Oga means a pickerel, but it turns out that that's the father of Nibakum and the grandfather of Debaske. Anyway,
now Oga, we live right next to the studio is right next to Oga Park, right?
Yeah,
and there's an affiliation with Mindamoya Lake with that. Keep going. You got me.
So that it ended up. I recorded Lewis there, and then I said I'll transcribe the story and write it out and stuff, and so I did, and then but I didn't do any archival research till later. So I actually recorded him in '96, and then I recorded Luigi again in like around 2002 with channel TV 22.
Yep.
And then by this time I started doing the archival research. And Lewis, when he told that story and we recorded it, he says, the way I heard this was one man, meaning Oga and Nibakum had, the fella had two names. And that was the father of the Basque. And so then when I did the archival research, I found out that those were three separate people.
Father, grandfather, and great-grandfather.
Yeah, no, grandfather, father, and son.
Okay.
And so he was blown away. He says, oh, I just thought this was a family story too. He didn't really realize that it was, but to me that was just the power and strength of the oral tradition that was passed down.
Right.
And so I did all this archival research, and then I made a newsletter article out of that as well, and then found his Dodem signature and stuff. And so that's when I found that the Devaske clan. At first, I wasn't too sure, because it was just now we know it was just that's a hoof print of the caribou that they signed. Yeah, but back then people didn't really know what it was, and it was again like Darlene Johnson was the one who said that's the hoof print of the caribou.
Right, because it's just two arcs. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and there's a sharp hook on the top, which really doesn't look like. And
then there's a straight line at the back, and then a terminal dot,
like a dew claw.
Yeah, and then the dew claws come out. So it's like the elbow. If you went down, put the elbow of that, and it spreads out to make it like a snowshoe for them.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the dew claws.
So it's not obvious at first. But
yeah. So others were saying, like the other fellow, a historian named Jim Morrison, who's done a lot of work on Robinson Huron Treaty. He was calling it Antler Clan. So he thought that was
actually an antler.
Okay. Yeah.
So is it Antler Clan, or is it Caribou Clan, or is it Hoof Clan?
It's Caribou Clan, but the way people are talking about it now, like when you situate it within the 7, they say there's Hoof Clan, and so it would be. But you actually you're not just Hoof Clan. You're either a moose, or a caribou, or an elk.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then this is the other thing that I kind of don't really like that's happening now, is people say I'm Bird Clan. But it's actually, no, you were a specific species of bird.
Right.
You were either an eagle or crow.
Crane.
Raven. Yeah. They're very different.
Yeah.
It isn't just bird.
No, your clan.
Yeah, it's the Bine.
Bine.
Yeah, the rough grouse partridge.
Okay.
So that was that's what I started finding with these archival documents I was going through. I wanted to find all these Dodems, and then I wanted to find all these written Anishinaabe. And then so that's why I just started pulling all this stuff together, and no formal training, and just basically a passion for it, and
out of interest, just because it was like
and it was more, and it comes back again to how we grew up, like what you said, we weren't taught any of this stuff.
Right.
We didn't know. There's just this big void, and when I was going through it, I felt like I'm trying to fill this void in myself of my identity, where I'm coming from, what as an Anishinaabe, that the language, the stories, the clans, and all our names and that.
Well, and I think when we look at when you look at Manitoulin as a whole, I don't think there are a whole lot of us that grew up knowing and hearing Sheguenda or Takama or all of these places that have First Nation names and Ojibway language based names. The story of Mindemoya Lake, for example, being the old woman type of thing. What other places on the island jump out like that? There would be.
Johnny told me this one place that I've been trying to find but I gotta go talk to people in Shishiguaning, Jishiguaning. But he said there's a hill there called Mingossing. And this Mingun, of course, is a wolf. And he says there's a big hill, Mingossing Jinkade, he says. So there's another story that was recorded by OCF, and it was told by Mary Grace Pelche. And it's a fantastic story that she talks about the origin of the name of Jishiguaning. And but in that part, she says they all lived in her version, they lived at Corbiere first because there was actually maple trees there. And so they would go there every year to make their maple syrup. And she said that there's one place though that's west of there called Mingossing as well. Anyway, this story has to do with the underwater Meshibiju, the underwater spirit. Yeah. And so it's really intrigued me. Okay, where is this place? And then I heard a buddy of mine, Isaac Murdoch, talking about that his elders on the North Shore talk about a place of the wolf on Manitoulin. So, but it's tied to he's established a camp called Nimki Ojibway, and that means Thunder Mountain, and he's got the story of why that's called that. So this wolf and that there's a connection there of these two places.
Right.
So that's one of the things that requires further research as well. Like, got to ask some of these elders if they heard of this place and which place is it, and then actually then to try and reconnect all these stories again back to this idea that the voice of the land is in our language, meaning to me also meaning our stories. So that's the importance of these place names that we have all around, that we would need to research more, and it's happening. Like all of the bands on the island are starting to change back to their Anishinaabe names, and then the one here, like for us, this really impacted me when I asked Johnny in Ojibway. I said, "Anish edeming michiging," what does chiging mean? And then when he's answering me, the first things he says, "Chijaja ko." They used to talk about this fella named Nanabush. That's his response to my answer. And then he goes into this whole story about how Nanabush was down by Lake Erie, and he was teasing the Mohawks, and they came running up here because they wanted to lay a beating on him. So he ran all the way up the Bruce Peninsula, and he got to Tobermory, but that's where he left his canoe, and he had his grandmother there. And then they paddled across, and then the Mohawks had to find a boat, and then they ended up coming across too, just still to chase him. And then he landed there at Providence Bay. Now, of course, that's called Ojibway, and that just means on the other side. But back then it was called Ndimwe Zibe, Old Lady River. Yeah. So that's where he went, and they landed there, and then he ran. According to the story, he got as far as there, and then his arms were tired. So then he grabbed his grandmother, put his grandmother on her back, and then he started running. And then he saw that the Mohawk, the Nottawick were still coming, and he started running along the shoreline, and then his legs were getting all cut up and scraped from the thorns, and his grandmother was starting to get heavy, and his legs were getting weak. So then that's when now this is by Moros, the way I understood it. He says he gets around there, and then that's when he decides he grabs his grandmother by her neck and her garment at the lower back, and he swings her around and he throws her in the middle of the lake, and he says, "I'll come back for you." So that's what that now they call that Treasure Island or Mindamoy Island, but that's Nanabojo Okame-san. That's Nanabush's grandmother laying there, according to Johnny's version. So her head is at the south, and then her you see her shoulders, and then the big part, that's her
rump.
Yeah, her rump, and then the legs. That's the very tip of that. That's the part that Chiging owns.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Chiging owns her
calves.
toes, and that. Yeah. So then Johnny says Nanabush kept running, and he says, and this was the part that I really liked. He says, "Migo Wampi Nanabojo Gib Meji Bapto." That Nanabush ran right through Chiging, and I was like, "Holy jeez! I never thought of it, or realized it." And I thought after a while, I was like, "How come we don't consider this place sacred?" That Nanabush, we all say, is our greatest teacher, and actually, if you go to the Treaty 3 area, some of them actually say that Nanabush is the creator. And if that's so, then how come we don't treat this place as a sacred place? So then he says he ran by the Powell grounds where that bluff starts, and he ran all along the bluff. But then he got to Cup and Saucer, and that's when he says he was gonna make a stand. He wasn't gonna quit running anymore. They were gonna catch up to him. So he's gonna put his spear together, and he says that's a Chigo one. He says Nanabojo grabbed those Chigo one, and he was going to put them together, but then he says, and he dropped them there. And then when he dropped them there, and more or less he panicked, and then he ran off. So that's the story of that, is that that's what that place is called, little Cup and Saucer, is Mchugwadnong. Mchugwadnong is the actual Cup and Saucer, and Chiging means the place of the spear. So people still dispute that, but what I did a little thing, because Johnny says, he says, "Gaio when in Sastazin we Chigowan." I don't really fully understand what that Chigowan is, and he says, but it's something used in hunting. So by the time Johnny heard the story, he knew the words and the story, but he didn't know what that actually
was.
Yeah, and then so I looked in old dictionaries, and I had another a collection of legends that were collected in 1911. Out by Thunder Bay, and there's a story in there called "The Origin of the Likeness of Nanabojo," and it shows different stories where Nanabush left his mark. Mm-hmm. And one of them, he says Nanabush made a spear, and he says the name of the spear is Chigyu, Mitchigyu. And so then once I knew that, then I looked in these old dictionaries, and one French dictionary says this was written by a fellow named L'Abbé Coke, and he says this word is already falling into disuse because the Indians no longer use this. They're too used to using metal spears instead of the bone spears or the antler spears.
Right.
So they're no longer using Michigyu, and that. But he says if it has one barb on there, that one barb on that Michigyu, it means it's used for sturgeon. And if it has two barbs on there, it's used for trout. And if it's three, it's used for beaver. So there, he says there's a Mik Michigyu, Name Michigyu, Namegos Michigyu. So these things were, they would take the tine of an antler, and then they would put those barbs in, they put a hole, and it would be like a toggle. So then they would affix it to a spear, and they'd tie it. Then whatever they were hunting or spearing, that thing would dislodge, and then whatever it was, the spear, the sturgeon or the beaver would swim away, but that thing would be stuck in them. And they would tire it out, and then they just...
Oh, and then they bring it back.
Yeah. So, long ago, when I first started out, I had seen... I was looking for what does Chiging mean. So, some people said that it means the place that ascends, with bluffs that ascend in step-like formation. And then there is a word, machiigat, that means something is big and flat. And so, when you look at those bluffs, they're sedimentary rock. So that had
fits.
Plausible, yeah. And then Basil Johnson had this book called By Canoe and Magazine, and it was about Nanabush running around. And he says that Michigyu is actually Michigiwednong, the bare north, and Giwednong is the north. And he says, and there's a big bay there that opens up, and that's why that's called Michigiwednong, which is also plausible, but the way Johnny pronounced it, and when you put all these archival documents together, then you see Chugwadnong is actually the bluff in the shape of the spearhead. And then so when you go there, what the Jaganash call the cup, I mean the saucer, that's the lower one, that's the spearhead, and then the higher one is the spear handle. And then I found later research, I found that the Library and Archives Canada, this fellow worked for the Canadian Geologic Service, and his name was Robert Bell, and he was the head of that. But he liked Indian legends, so he got people. He would come out, and he came out to Manitoulin, and he wrote down a bunch of stories. But then he told others, "I got to go back, but I'll pay you whatever if you write some more out and you send them." So they got a bunch of these stories over there, and that was one. This fellow was named Misabe, and he was from I believe it now we call it Henvey Inlet, but it was either Henvey Inlet or no, it wasn't Shawanaga. So it must have been one. Yeah. Anyway, he wrote and he said, so he drew that diagram, and he says but his version is Nanabush chasing the giant beaver, and this giant beaver actually is the one that created the dam at Sault Ste. Marie, and that dam created the pond that now became Lake Superior, and the island at Isle Royale by Thunder Bay, that's one of the beaver houses. And then also at Michipicoten, that island out there, that's also another house of beaver. So in this version, Nanabush is chasing that beaver because that beaver is menacing the Anishinaabeg, and then they break that dam, and then all the debris, that's all the islands in the North Channel from that dam,
all flow out.
Yeah, they all flow out, and then that beaver swam away, and Nanabush chased them, and then he chased them right up the French River, and then at Recollet Falls, that beaver kind of got stuck, and then that's when he was trying to dig because it was too shallow, and then that's how he made those Recollet Falls over there, and then he went all the way out to the sea, and that's what in this version, the beaver escapes Nanabush, but in other versions, Nanabush is able to kill the beaver
to catch him.
Yeah,
and as growing up, I remember, and I think the OCF did put out those books, the legends of Nanabush, and how, the beaver got its tail.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Those were always really interesting to us as kids, and a good teaching tool. Because the memory is vivid. I still remember those pictures of. As a kid, and we need more of that type of relationship, and with literature as well, and with the written word, so that our kids can see it and look at it and make a connection to it, so that they can start to retain and remember the language. And that kind of brings me to some of your work with the ARP, we call it in Chiging, or the Anishinaabe Revival Program, which is when you left when you left the Ojibway Cultural Foundation, you came to Lakeview School, and you started a revival program for Anishinaabe there. And it was a little bit of a different approach. Tell me a little bit about what you did there and what you hope continues.
I guess one more point about that story, though, about the Chigwedno. The word itself is based on our language is like Latin, eh? So we'll say something. The usual example I have is he's wearing a monocle, and then he took his monocle off and used his binoculars. So then ocular, and ocle refers to a lens, and mono refers to single or one, and then bi is two. So the same thing, he used a periscope, then a microscope, or a telescope. So you're just, these are called morphemes. You're putting word parts together to get a different meaning. That's what how Ojibway works. So with this Michigiu, you have the word for spear, the noun for spearhead, and then adin refers to a ridge or a bluff, and then nong is just a locative form. So Michigwad nong, that's why here Chiging just means the place of the spear. And when you say Michigyu, it's just the noun. But when you make it locative, Michiging. So, and then when you say Michigwadin, it means a bluff in the shape of a spear. And then Michigwadnong, the place, the bluff where you're actually making the location. And so, like the other example is actually Spadina Avenue in Toronto. what it actually means, it's it's an anglicized form of Ishpadana. And Ishpiming is high, Ishpa means high, so Ishpadana means the high ridge. And so when you go to Casaloma, you'll see that that bluff there,
Right.
that ridge, yeah.
Right.
So that's what this name means. Michigwadnong means the bluff in the shape of the spear, and that's really the actual cup and saucer. And if you look at it from the aerial view, you see, again, they say Nanabush could turn into a giant, and that's why this thing is so big. And so that's why the bay in our community is called Michiging, because it's actually on the spear.
It's on the spear.
Yeah, so that's what that means. But people still, I still see people don't believe me or don't look at that. To me, I look at the evidence of it. And when Johnny said, I don't really know what that means. And then when I looked at the dictionaries and then I found the different words and looked at different sources and I found it. And like when I said, I saw earlier on, one of the translation was the place of the harpoon. And my preconceived notion of what a harpoon is, I was like, no, it's not a harpoon.
Yeah.
But actually it is.
When you look at it,
Yeah,
when you look
that-
at the
yeah.
pictures, those old pictures
Yeah.
of what it looks like,
And when it dislodges,
dislodges.
yeah, then you pull that in. That's technically what that name is. But what really sunk deeper into me, I guess, was Johnny didn't know what that word was, and then only through research I was able to find it. But to me, again, this come back to the strength of the oral tradition. And the other thing is that the importance of the oral tradition to us now to find out what these mean is because that word actually was obsolete, and it was only carried forward in story. And if you don't know the story, you're not going to know the word. And so he knew the word, but he didn't know what it meant. But he carried it enough forward that now we were able to restore its meaning.
Right.
And then you actually look at this, that it's actually what they would say, what he would say, Jibwa Dugushnoat Wapshkiet, before the coming of Europeans, that this word was what we used for this place. And if you think of this as in terms of Aboriginal title, that way before there was even, we used metal or iron spears or steel spears or whatever, we actually used bone.
Right.
And antler. And so here this place was named for that. And how old that name is, we don't know, but it actually predates all this contact. So that's what I like about that story, and why I keep talking about it, is to me it shows the importance of our language, but also the importance of our stories. And when you put those two together, you're able to actually give answers to a lot of different things now. And so with ARP, that's the kind of thing I wanted people to learn, our students, is that we have a depth in our philosophy that doesn't get properly conveyed when we actually just speak. You can speak Nishnabemwan, but that doesn't mean you understand the underlying worldview or that you exhibit it sometimes. So the other part is that you actually have to bring that out more explicitly now, seemingly to me anyway, when we teach it. And so the other thing why I mentioned that Latin, made the analogy to Latin, is we don't teach that way of our language as well. But that's how our language is more descriptive than English, is if we were able to teach kids how to put those morphemes together, then you get a more exacting description of things, and that, to me, that's a whole different cognitive process when you're able to scrunch words together and describe a whole practice of a word, of a phenomenon. And when I still get amazed when I'm listening to transcribing elders' interviews, and I was just like, wow, they put that all in one word, that whole process,
The whole thing.
yeah. And I forget the exact word. That I was doing transcribing an interview of James Simon, the artist, Mishbinijba, and he was describing one of his paintings, and he had, the mountain paintings he does.
Yeah.
And he's got this egg there, and then on the other side he has this rock. So he says in Ojibway, but it was just one word, that this rock has already been heated and burnt and used up. And it was just like, so you see, that took me like a sentence to say. But he did that all in one word. And I was just like, wow, is that ever neat? But he didn't deliberately do it. He just kind of, that's just how it comes out. Yeah. So, of course, like you always hear our language is verb based. And it's, of course, then like some look into this, but some don't put they'll use it when they do a description or a conference, and they'll say our language is verb based and we're action oriented people. But then I find they don't actually try and prove that or give demonstration of that. We just all have to accept it. And just the way I'm wired, I'm like, okay, how is it action based?
Show me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's action based.
Yeah.
I want to do it.
Yeah. How is this?
Yeah.
So that's the thing is, and then once I started seeing that, it actually is in those morphemes and that's the part we're not teaching our kids, how to wordplay with that. And remember, I was telling you when I wanted to make this app about running, and then I said it would be like Grover. I would make you like Grover on Sesame Street. You know, when Grover is on the camera, and then he says near, and he comes running up to the camera, and then he goes running way back and far. Yeah, and then he runs off to the side. And, yeah. So then I was gonna say with you'd come running up, and then you'd say bijabato. And that means you come running towards somebody. Then you turn around and you'd say nimbato, and you run away.
Right.
And then you run in a circle and you'd say bimskopto. You're running in a circle. And then giwepto or kwandwepto. You know, all you're doing is you're putting patto with the final morpheme is patto, referring to running, and then you put in front the manner of running or the direction of running,
like a prefix.
Yeah.
Now, in the design of the program, how much of that were you able to infuse in the instruction? Because that pedagogy is not really how English is taught in school. That becomes. It is a catch-22 because it's we say it's an oral language, and and you've, like you said, you've been criticized for writing it down. But if you don't write it down, then it doesn't get carried on. And so, how do you manage to how do we get past that?
I think it's actually, to me, I don't want to sound fatalistic, but it comes down to, I've been thinking a lot about the kind of like cause and effect, your whole situation. So, and how you actually, your response is determined a lot of time, your individual response and also your societal response sometimes is determined by the pressure it's faced with. So right now, I still think we have these rose-colored glasses that we got a lot of speakers here.
Right.
And we'll be able to pull it out of the fire and do it.
But that's not the case.
No, and there's a big gap between the speakers that we have and the new ones that are coming up. That it's a real serious bottleneck, and it ain't gonna happen. Whereas
it won't happen unless something drastic.
Yeah, and then that's when you really do it.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like to me the analogy is climate change as well. Like people are like, no, and we still have deniers of it,
right?
You know? And then we just had all these regulations that were coming up that would address it. That then government comes in and wants the economy to go, and they pull the plug on those regulations so that there's now you can start
no carbon tax or whatever, new pipeline,
and
open up
Trump
the coal mines.
Trump and coal, So it's so that's the same thing. You want, at the end of the day, they want jobs and they want their own livelihood as well, understandably. But it's like, okay, well, the thing that's difficult, I think, is that one of the things that ARP faced is that it became the school's responsibility to teach language rather than the community and the family. So this idea, we didn't have enough resources to answer all these different groups as well. And then a lot of times there's just not enough time in the day, and it is a difficult language to learn. But the other thing is we haven't developed the pedagogy enough and to further test it. So the other thing is that I thought of was I know that like, you know, you hear it gets back to you when people are bashing what you've done. So when I had heard people say of Nishnabema Revival Program that, oh, it's just teaching nouns, and I'm not getting anything out of it, and this thing doesn't work and stuff, and I'm just like, I know I heard who the person that said that, and I'm like, you didn't even try it, and it's like you're on a diet, and you did 1 week of the diet, and you say this thing sucks, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm not losing it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's, or if your workout regime, like you've done 2 weeks of it, and it's like, that thing ain't working. I'm not going to bother it. So there's this idea that we want immediate results for whatever it is, if it's a diet or if it's a workout, or
information, fast food, microwave. Isn't there something faster than a microwave?
Yeah.
Like, I'd want to wait a minute.
Yeah. So it's the same thing with language. They want, I honestly think some people are just waiting for a microchip to be put into our heads to do that. Yeah. But so to me, the pressure to learn right now in our society isn't enough to make people want to learn it. And the other thing that I noticed, just from years of teaching beginner Ojibway, that people get to a certain level, and then that's good enough for them.
Right.
It meant, you know, that they're able to say Ani, Ndijnakas, and Donjaba, and Chinendum, and Miigwechendum, and then that's good enough, and know them.
Yeah.
So that's good enough for them, and they're not going to exert themselves further to get to the next level of language. So in the past, what has happened is this stock phrase method. And stock phrases is, I come up to you and I say Anishna, and then you say
Nisha and Kingish.
Yeah. So that's stock phrases. You're never hungry, you're never grouchy, you're never sick, you're never tired or whatever. Yeah. So you have to learn more words to actually respond to that, than to then engage in a deeper discussion and stuff. So we were trying that with and the principal thing with our language, that I was trying to demonstrate why it was showing those nouns, is everything you talk about everything either as animate or inanimate. And although our language is verb based, you have to know what you're talking about if it's animate or inanimate. And then that affects the choice of verb.
And that would always, when we were taking the classes and stuff like that, and it seemed like it needed to be innate, because and it was almost cart before the horse for me, because I would always, things that I would think were animate, was actually inanimate. And I'm like, how the hell why would that be inanimate when it's a berry or when it's a whatever? And so it was like, by using it though, you would know, right? And it would always confuse me to the point of damn it.
Well, like the thing is, of course, the strawberry daemon, that's inanimate, and of course, then you think of heart. It literally means heartberry. Yeah, and you think of heart pulses, and
it has to be.
Yeah,
animate.
And then how people, it's a medicine and everything. Yeah, but it's inanimate. And now what I've seen happening, so a raspberry though is animate. Muskumin is animate and Demin is inanimate. So it's, I don't really know the real reason, but part of what I think it is because you look at the blackberry, and we call that gadat, it's animate as well. But I think it's because it has those thorns.
Okay.
Well, yeah, raspberries, gooseberries.
It's more of the whole plant versus there's the individual berry, maybe.
So, and because blueberry also is inanimate, and so it's a different. So sometimes it's arbitrary, and I just would say to students, just learn it, memorize it, because after a while, what you're gonna, if you want to say manapogut or manapogoze, it tastes good, but you got to decide the right one.
Right.
And then, or if you say Nwamdan or Pekibadon or Pekibana, I picked it or I saw it, you got to pick the right verb. But if you don't know if it's animate or inanimate, you're going to choose the wrong one. Yeah. So that's why that was the crux of it. And people didn't get that. So the idea was to teach that first and then describe it. So it's red, it tastes good, it tastes sour, it tastes bitter, or whatever it is, or it's big, or it's whatever. And then to say, I like the taste of it. And the idea was to try, through art, was to try and get people saying things that they would say every day, but not just about strawberries, but then once you learn the pattern,
then apply it
to other. Yeah, right. Then you know, okay, I already know this word, and it's for animate, or it's for inanimate. Then I can use whatever thing I know is animate or inanimate, I can use that.
And I can use a suffix or whatever it is to describe that for the appropriate word.
Yeah.
Now, but English is a complicated language to learn. And to be literate, English is one of the hardest languages to learn. As unfortunately, so is Ojibway.
Yeah.
But when you think of what has to happen, if there was one thing that has to happen for language to be retained or revived or sustained or whatever the case may be, if there was one conscious shift that a community could make, what would it be? Would it be increase the demand for it? Would it be spend 20 minutes a day talking to your kids or interact? Or what would the one thing be that we would need to get us on that right path? I know for English, and when we're talking literacy, we started with something very simple called Take 15 with little kids.
Yeah.
Take 15 minutes a day and read to your child, and we provided the books and we provided that because we know that as educators and as parents, that if you give 15 minutes to read to a little kid, that 15 minutes will span an hour in no time. So it was a little bit of a trick in terms of who doesn't want to cuddle with their kid and read for an extra 15 minutes. But that one kind of idea of Take 15, what would be something similar for that kind of revival?
It's more difficult because the situation's different. Like you don't, like for instance, you don't have the language.
Right.
And so you're learning, and then you're also trying to pass it on. So it's kind of a double hurdle, eh? But I actually, in Toronto, I met a woman. Well, I met her before, but her and her husband's a linguist, and she's a Anishinaabe, and they got 2 children now. And so they're actually trying to pass on. They're trying to learn, and they're also
pass on some time.
Yeah. So, but what's been really interesting is I've said before that I made a mistake when I was raising my kids, in that I didn't actually do this, but she's doing what I should have done, and that's actually just use whatever bits of language she has with her kids all the time,
over and over and over again.
Yeah. And so what freaked me out is that, so she'd ask me to go over and visit, so I'd go visit them, and then the kid goes to bed at like 8. He's just like 3 or whatever, and she had all these ARP stuff. And so then he's kind of like, he's getting tired.
Materials you've created through the program. Yeah. Okay.
And so Robin Generu's sketch of this
pictures.
Book. Yeah. And so she says to him, Nagik mage makwa. Do you want the bear or the otter? And he says, Nagik, nui wa nagik. I want the otter. So then she goes, okay. So she says, you want to come up to me? We'll she asked me to read to him, but I didn't understand that's what she wanted. So we went up there, and then she had it in a binder, because we actually just had those online, so there weren't a physical book for her to read. So she had this binder, and she printed it out, and then she would flip that story, and the story was the mink and the otter, and the otter's fishing, and he puts all these fish on the shore, and he comes back, and all the fins are eaten from it. And then he comes back again, then all the fish are eaten. So he ends up looking around, and he finds the mink had eaten all his fish. So he's going to beat him up. and he holds him up, and Robin did a really good drawing of that otter holding that mink, and then that mink starts crying, and he says, don't, we're related, you're my cousin. And then so he puts him back down, and he says, I won't do it again. And he says, okay, I won't beat you up because you're my cousin. Anyway, I was just like, oh, and they were just pencil drawings, they weren't fully illustrated. So the kid actually reacted, like you said, to those stories. So I went again another time, but this time they actually had an animated video from people in Minnesota, and this was Anton Troyer. He's a young Anishinaabe. Well, he's not that young anymore, but he learned Ojibway as a second language as well. And he put together this video with others and this story. And so I was there, and she put this story on the iPad, and then he's narrating in Ojibway, and they got
like a graphic,
the otter. It's a cartoon, and then a butterfly goes flying by, and then he goes "Memengwa," and what really surprised me was because so that up to that point in the story, like I was listening, the narrator never mentioned
butterfly.
No. And then blueberries went by, and he goes, mean. So he was actually picking off words that she had actually
taught him.
Yeah. And that he was actually seeing this now, and he was actually generating his own, and using his own language at that point. But he's not saying, oh, I'm tired. I want to eat blueberries in my cereal. You know, he's not really.
Right. He's not. It's not problem solving. But he's identifying.
Yeah.
And you know what? And maybe that's it. Maybe it's just. Maybe it's not something simple, but maybe that's one of the key things. And we talked about it right at the very beginning when we talked about Tanya, is actually having resources and at our fingertips that kids can use, and that's actually free.
Yeah.
Right. And we had this discussion when we talked about ARP, whether we monetize it or how do we recoup our cost. And that was one of the things that we had agreed on way back from the very beginning, is that access to language resources needs to be free.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you hold the key, and you can only unleash it by paying for it. And that's not how knowledge needs to be transmitted, and that's not how languages can be revived, is by someone holding on to the key as the gatekeeper, if you will. It has to be accessible, 24 hours a day if that particular learner wants to read it at 3 in the morning. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that we need the funding to do that type of thing, and we're always fighting for that. But that's a big idea that we need to carry forward, and I commend you on the work that you've done, and so actually did the Governor General, right, as the Meritorious Service or medal. You received that, and that was a big deal, and I know you received it on behalf of the Anishinaabe Revival team, but kudos for you for that. Now that ceremony was down in the big city, and I'm gonna just before we sign off, I want to talk a little bit about if there was something that you miss when about the city when you're home, and then what's something that you miss about home when you're there. What would you say are those things you miss the most?
With the city, I actually just like the convenience.
Right.
Like I actually, this actual past term, like from September to November, because I was studying for my comprehensive exams, actually I basically was more or less, especially the last month, was in my room, and I didn't go anywhere because I was just studying, reading,
a book a day, man.
But I wasn't, a book a day, and I was making my notes and stuff, but before then, like I'd get to go to these libraries and check out different, like York has quite a bit of books, but then you can go down to the Metro Reference Library if they don't have any in Toronto. And then when I went to the Metro Reference Library, they have this one area where they actually do these little exhibits. So one time the exhibit was on historic Aboriginal canoe routes around the area. So I just go in and check stuff.
There it is.
Yeah. And then now this month it was Alice in Wonderland, and they have they have a number of the first editions of the book, and then first the illustrated editions of the book, and then and it's just, to me, kind of, I'm still a bibliophile, like, and to look at how somebody created. Basically, you look at, you want to say on the one hand, well, that's what does Anishinaabe care about Alice in Wonderland? But to me, it's the process of creating something that ends up taking such a big effect all over. Like you mentioned Alice in Wonderland to anybody, they'll know what you're talking about. But whereas here, if we talk about Nanabush and the giant trout, you don't really hear, you don't know what they're, or if I just say Pakwis or Nanapadam, you don't know what I'm talking about. And it's because we don't know our story. And that's the thing, is we got to put these stories in and kind of almost package them. But like you said, when we were kids, we had Daphne Ojik's Nanabush stories, eh? And those are a version that sometimes she had to clean up as well. But there are other versions that are more body and kind of lewd at times, eh?
So you have, when you're there, you like the convenience of having access to that information. And if it's not there, then you don't have to go very far to get it. And here, that's always an issue, right? Because you're traveling so far. What about when you're there? What do you miss about home?
Well, of course, it would be family. And then also, on the other hand, family, but just on the one hand, I want to say nature, but then what I find with the city, you can actually, if you really wanted to find places of nature, you still can. And of course, it ain't the same. You're not going to find
it. It's not as raw, but it's there.
And, so that's the other part that when I lived there, I often thought that, we can still have a land consciousness or a land ethic in the city. And especially an Anishinaabe one, I thought, but and it was just because one time I was up at Scarborough Bluffs and I met a fox, and then the other headline at that time was deer were coming in and to the suburbs and just coming south to go and eat. Yeah. And so
easy food.
Yeah, and that was there.
People don't want to kill them either.
No, yeah. So it's there's a lot there. The other convenience is this. The idea of, and you mentioned this earlier about the cultural production or artistic production. So one of the things when I go back, I want to check out this Art Gallery of Ontario. They did an exhibit on the Anthropocene, and this Anthropocene is basically, you have the Pleistocene and these other eras.
This new era that's kind of happening now.
Yeah.
That humans have never been a part of. Yeah. Of the dawn of a new age, really, in geologic time. Yeah. And we've created that.
Yeah, and that's what this is about. And I admired this guy's work, Edward Bertaniski, and he's a photographer. And I remember when I first saw it, I was like, wow, that's a cool photo. And I went up closer, then I realized it's actually it's a mine. And then the other that I saw was a dump in New York. But they had he took the angle that everything was divided up so geometrically that you wonder what you're looking at first. Then you go in close and you realize that's garbage. Wow. Or you go in, that's uranium mining tailings. Right. Yeah. So you find out all this stuff, and then you look at these are a strip mine in Peru, and you're looking at a mountain being just
gouged.
Yeah. And it's just done in such a way that
it almost looks like art.
Yeah.
I've seen some of those pictures.
So right. Anyway, so going to stuff like that, but what the Art Gallery of Ontario actually has done, they got a new Anishinaabe as a curator. So instead of putting off to one side the Anishinaabe art, they actually put the Anishinaabe art throughout the galleries now. And then what this lady hired Shirley Williams and Isidore Toulouse to write texts, and so we have texts in Anishinaabe to go with that art. Yeah. So I want to go and check that out again, and you get to see a lot of different art and then of course like museum stuff you get to go and see, and of course music.
Yeah, you're a big music buff and connoisseur of sorts.
So that's the kind of stuff I like to do, is just to check out concerts and galleries and museums and stuff like that. And then you just have different, you learn different things from different people, what they're doing. One of the books I had to read for Canadian history was about the French. And it's really about the Quiet Revolution, they called it. And it really struck me that, you know, what the process they went through is almost like what, when we talk about what some people, how some people envision self-government now as a municipalized form, that actually is a model. But we won't, of course, ever look at it that way. You want it different. Of course, we want it different. But actually, when you read that book and you know a bit about what we're going through, you see the parallels. And so it's just this idea that you're not so insular up here, that when you're down there, you're exposed to more ideas of what's going on elsewhere.
Well, and I think we look at, you know, when that whole being ethnocentric, or thinking that, you know, as a human species, we have way more similarities than differences. And I think we get caught in that thinking, if we're not exposed to, and I think that's what this, you know, down south does, or these bigger urban settings, is it shows you that, you know, the struggle is real, that everybody is going through, you know, it shows you that everybody's going through some kind of struggle of sorts, and maybe we can learn from some of those struggles that people have already solved. So that's an important reminder, I think, when we see that type of thing. Okay, so your PhD is done hopefully in the next year, or what's your timeline?
3 years, 2020, June 2020 is what I'm shooting for.
So you've got another year and another 2 years, a year and a half.
Yeah.
And then what happens after that?
I don't really know. My that Carolyn Podruchny I was talking about, she was the one who says, well, the program's actually 6 years. And so she says, but I want you out of here in 3. But I'm such a slow, like I was telling you, I'm a slow reader and a slow writer. I think I'll be 4 years. So I think it would be June 21 that I'll be done.
Right.
But I'm shooting for June 2020. Right now, there's a big, just because of like Truth and Reconciliation Commission and other things, there's a lot of actually jobs going on, getting posted now for universities.
Okay.
And what I'm
like kind a professor or lecturer.
Yeah. So what I'm kind of scared of is all these jobs will be taken up by the time I'm done.
What about political office? Any inkling for politics?
I remember a cousin of mine said to me, I'm going to nominate you again. And I was like, no, don't bother. I'm not going to run.
Because you get nominated for chief almost every year. 2 years.
I think this was the first time in a while that I never did. But so people finally got the hint. But I said to them, well, she said, why won't you do it? And I says, well, who's going to do what I do? All the stuff that I'm doing now, I think the stuff that I'm doing, the historical research, the language research, the language production,
it's important, and it's this very skill set base.
Yeah, that I says you got more than enough other people to be chief here or to be a political leader. I says, and I always thought, I remember years ago, Sam DeBosque and I would talk, and then he would say that too. And I says, I always just thought of myself more as an advisor rather than the actual leader. And even when we talk about ARP, the Anishinaabe Revitalization Program, one of our summer students was there, and they were like, the teachers aren't speaking. And he says, you should actually make them speak. And then I was like, no, you just build resentment for the language when you actually say you gotta do this. I says, what we try to do, but this is a whole nother discussion, is what you try to do is lead by example. You try and show people this is how you do it, and that they should emulate it, and that it can be done. So if you see, like, but what other people say, then what ends up happening, though, that's a kind of double-edged sword, is the people end up saying, well, Alan will do it then. But it's like, no, this takes everybody.
Everybody's got to chip in.
Yeah. So, and it's the same thing with with leadership, like our leadership were consensus builders before, rather than tyrants. So,
well, you know, and I think there's credence in that saying that the person that you want to be chief, or you want to be running for office, is the person that doesn't want the job at all. And because of that humility, and because of because of all of what you've said. And so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to press that issue maybe at another podcast when you come back, because we're definitely going to have you back. There's things that I didn't get to talk on or talk about that I do want to hear. I want to hear more about the treaty. I want to hear about the wampum belt.
We didn't touch that.
We didn't get to talk about that. And I know you've got a big love for music, and we've gone to a lot of concerts back in the day. Mm-hmm. And I know you've hit the music scene recently. Who did you see with? Was it Slayer that you went and saw?
No, the Ministry.
Oh, Ministry. That's right. Yeah. So you've got this this affinity, or this love for music as well, and a deep knowledge there. But it's always good to talk to you, Alan. You're just a wealth of knowledge, and you're a great friend, and I wish you the best. I know you're doing great things in Toronto, and I wish you the best in 2019, and you never know, maybe we'll hit up one of those concerts together in the next not too distant future. But for sure, we'll be watching those Leaf games and texting back and forth, because Alan and I are big Toronto Maple Leafs fans, and maybe this is the year.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Thanks again for coming out, Chimigwech, and I was glad to see you.
Okay, Miigwech. Yeah.